Hey everyone, so we're finally getting the long-awaited Oden backstory, and I think it's fair to say that this is the most hyped, most built-up backstory that we've had in One Piece so far. Like, we've had times before where we've caught glimpses of characters' past before actually getting their full backstories to kind of tease us of what's to come, but this is the first time that Oda has had the Straw Hat crew themselves hyping up how fantastic and how tragic this backstory is. Like, that scene in chapter 920 where they're all listening and are completely captivated by the story of Oden, where they're genuinely breaking down and getting furious and emotional just hearing about how his tale ends, that sets a really, really high bar for what we, the readers, should expect of this story. And at the time we didn't really know that much. The Wano arc had barely begun, but now 40 chapters later, I think the potential of what Oden's backstory could be has started to take shape, and so I wanted to talk about what we can expect from this backstory before it begins, and how it may be different from anything else we've seen in One Piece so far. So, in general in One Piece there are two ways backstories are written. One is as a literal story, meaning we are transported back to a very specific point in time, and from there on the story progresses scene by scene, this basically the same way it would be told if it were happening in the present day. And okay, now the second way is through montage, where the story moves very quickly. So we read the backstory as basically a series of quick cuts between scenes, and maybe for a page or two we linger on one scene in particular and let it play out, but mostly it's moving through the story in a very fast-paced manner. So basically, just for an example, you could say Nami's backstory was the first type of backstory that I'm talking about, where from start to finish we're following the full events of the day that Arlong came to town, scene by scene. Now on the other hand, something like Senor Pink or even Brook's backstory, those are told mostly as montages. There's a lot of quick cuts to tell the story, very efficiently in a very short amount of time. Now, of course, sometimes there are like full backstories with portions of montage in them, like Chopper and Law's backstories feature a couple of montages in the middle, but overall they're still told as complete backstories, progressing scene by scene for the most part like we would expect while reading the normal story. So personally, I get much more invested in these sort of complete backstories. I do feel sad reading Senor Pink and Brook's backstories. They're still very well done montages, they're still very well executed, but I personally don't feel the same level of investment as reading, as I said, Nami's backstory or really like Robin's backstory, for instance, because the gradual pacing of those backstories helps draw me in more to these characters' individual struggles. So now, going back, considering Oden's backstory, to me, this means that Oda can tell this backstory Oden's backstory in three ways. So on the one hand, Oden's backstory is set to have an absolutely ridiculous amount of storytelling to cover. I don't think any of us could have fully grasped this back when Wano started, but at this point it's crazy to just think about how lengthy of a narrative we would have to read to cover this man's backstory, especially considering it seems that Oda is starting it off literally at square one, when Oden was just this rowdy, disobedient son of the Shogun who had been cast out to learn a lesson. Thinking just from this point, how long and winding is his full tale set to be? Like, how much has to be covered here? We're gonna have to follow this man as he first meets and gains the respect of each of his 9 followers. Is he going to meet them individually? In groups? Is there a short story plan for each of them and how he gains each of their loyalty? And after all, at that point, we still need to know, or at this point, we still need to know more about the scabbards themselves as well. So after that, at what point does Oden then become daimyo of Wano, and what does he do to turn his reputation around and become worthy of this title? And then beyond that, what about Lady Toki, right? This pivotal figure who may have passed through time from the Void Century itself, like how big of a role does she play in the story? At what point are we going to meet her? Are we going to follow the complete romance of Oden and Toki? Like, what did he do to make a woman who has been traveling through time for centuries fall in love with him? And then after that, what about the birth of Momonosuke and Hiyori? Are we going to get to spend some time seeing what they were like before all this tragedy occurred? And then after Oden's position as basically one of the greatest men in Wano is established, the stuff about after he becomes daimyo, has a family of followers and stuff, would we then have to transition to basically going down this rabbit hole of Oden's adventures outside of Wano? Like, could we potentially be getting that part of his story as well? How he joined Whitebeard's ship, what happened when Roger poached Oden from Whitebeard, where did his journey with the Pirate King take him, what did he learn, why is it that opening the borders of Wano country is supposedly crucial to changing the world itself, as we learned in chapter 959. And after this arc of his is, after that part of it's completed, don't we still have to come back around to learn about Oden's return and his last days in Wano? So we still need to actually get to the tragedy of his him being betrayed by Orochi, the arrival of Kaido, Oden's battle with Kaido, which we're probably going to get to see, then Oden's execution, the Scabbard's final escape to Oden Castle, the death of Toki, all that stuff. So, my god, like, just listing all this out, it seems like this is really on a completely different scale from any other backstory we've had in One Piece. And so, going back to what I was saying, I think there are 3 routes that Oda could take with telling this. The first would be telling it all montage style, to get through this gigantic narrative efficiently while still getting across the main beats. If Oda were to tell this entire thing through a series of quick cut scenes, with mostly just 1 or 2 panels per scene, then even then though it might take 8 to 10 chapters to cover everything that I talked about. And I personally really hope that Oda does not go down this route, since I feel like a story that has been hyped up this much deserves to be told at a proper pacing, and you know, however long it takes is however long it takes. So, but it's more important that we actually be drawn in and read it from start to finish as one epic journey. And that's basically the second option, just tell it like you would a normal backstory, but in this case that would make this like really more of a standalone epic that just happens to be being told as a backstory. And with that option, that means that we would be in like for a ridiculously long divergence from our present day storyline. If you actually think about all the beats that have to happen in Oden's story, and if you imagine that it's not just a bunch of fast cut scenes, but rather like Oda's writing this as he would a normal story from start to finish, then honestly, like even 20 chapters would be a low estimate. This backstory may even be upwards of 30 chapters, like as crazy as that sounds. But again, no backstory in One Piece has ever had anywhere close to as long of a narrative to cover as this. Even if we were to take out all the middle stuff with Oden's adventures outside of Wano, like covering everything from him gathering his crew, basically his followers, meeting his wife, becoming the shogun or the daimyo of Wano, like his entire rise, considering he's at like level 0 right now, so his entire rise to becoming the daimyo, and then the second half would then basically be his fall, so covering Orochi's betrayal, how did he meet Orochi, then Fukujuro playing into that and everything like that, Orochi's fall, battle with Kaido, Kaido's invasion, Kaido destroying the country, or the Beast Pirates ravaging the country, you know, Oden's execution, all that stuff. Like, there's still like 2 gigantic halves of story that have to be covered here. Now, maybe even there's a third route, which I also feel is possible, would be if Oda chose to tell this backstory in pieces. So maybe right now we just get Oden's rise and uniting the Scabbards, then maybe the next phase of the backstory would be told later down the line, when it's time for us to learn about Oden's adventures with Whitebeard and Roger, and then maybe even further down the line we would get, you know, the last part of his backstory, his final days, Orochi's betrayal, Kaido's attack, etc. I don't know if I like this piecemeal route though, since I would personally prefer to just get the whole story at once. It seems to be a very exciting story from start to finish, so I'd rather just get it all now, and then just progress to the main meat of the arc itself. But it's, you know, piecemeal is also the only way that I could imagine making this whole thing more digestible without simply turning, you know, the epic of Oden into a condensed montage. So still, basically the second route, the straightforward backstory route, seems the most likely to me. I guess we should all just strap in and accept that the Battle of Onigashima isn't starting anytime soon, because we're going to be following the adventures of Oden for a long while. And honestly, I'm pretty excited because this is clearly the backstory that Oda has put the most thought into. This is a backstory that clearly has a lot more to its narrative than anything else we've seen so far, and Oda has been saying for a while that he has saved all his best ideas for the final phase of the series. And a little while ago he mentioned that Wano is going to become, quote, 50 times more interesting. Now, in terms of what we can actually expect from his story, besides all that I talked about above, what's the actual story going to be about? Why are we going to delve so deep into the story of Oden? So longtime viewers have probably seen my Wano arc analysis. If you haven't, then of course I recommend you check it out, because there I talked about, at least in the beginning for the first 10 minutes, why it seemed to me that Oda had clearly set up Oden and the Scabbard's story to be a parallel to Luffy and the Straw Hat's story. And I spent a good amount of time explaining the evidence for why to me it suggests that this parallel is very deliberate. And so going along with this thought that we are going to be reading a story very similar to Luffy's adventure, you know, a man starting off alone, gathering a group of followers, making a name for himself, going on a grand adventure, all with a specific dream in mind, that all actually is the same reason that I already feel that this backstory is set up to be especially tragic, no matter what, because unlike Luffy's story, the divergence is that we know that Oden's story actually ends with him being betrayed and executed before his dream can be fulfilled. And interestingly, if you think back to all the sad backstories we've ever had, like Nami's, Robin's, Chopper's, etc., like, the positive point to them was always that after seeing how much this character had suffered, we then get to, like, pretty soon after get to see things become a lot better for them as Luffy and the rest of the crew do their thing. So obviously, you know, they can't replace the people they've lost, but they're still able to find happiness and a better life at the end of the day, despite all like the sadness that we see in their backstory. What's different is that Oden's backstory ends in death, plain and simple. So no matter how attached we get to this character, we're going to see things get very, very bad for him, and then he's going to die, and that's it. Like, of course his will is going to be passed on, and I'm sure he is certain his dream will one day be fulfilled because of, you know, his faith in his followers, but his personal story, no matter what, it ends in irrevocable tragedy. It's not even like Roger's case where his life ended prematurely, but he went out on his terms at least, you know, by his choice. Oden was betrayed by someone he trusted, and then despite being the hero of Wano, he failed and was defeated by the invading monster Kaido, who would then go on to destroy his land. So all that is to say, like, I'm really looking forward to this one. I think we're going to be going on a very long detour, but it should be a great ride, and by the end we're going to have a much better context for this conflict and what this arc is basically all about. So that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, then definitely like, share, and subscribe. And my big analysis video for the month will be coming out next Tuesday, so look out for that.